In the late 1950s, two inventors, Alfred and Marc Chavannes, chased a simple idea. Walls did not have to stay flat and boring. Home design started leaning modern, and new materials sounded like progress. They looked at wallpaper and saw an opening. If they could make a surface that felt different, looked different, and stayed clean, they might sell a whole new kind of interior finish. Fielding and Chavannes aimed straight at plastic because plastic promised uniform results and mass production. Paper tore, paint chipped, fabric collected dust. A plastic wall covering sounded tougher and, in theory, easier to maintain. But the problem was that plastic also tended to look cheap and lifeless, so they needed texture, something built into the material itself, so the wall could feel designed, not just covered. That goal pushed them into experimentation, not decoration. They worked toward a wallpaper that acted like a product from the future, patterned by structure, not by ink. It had to be flexible enough to install, consistent enough to manufacture, and unusual enough to stand out in a crowded home market. They did not set out to protect packages. They set out to reinvent a wall, and they bet on plastic to do it. They moved from idea to experiment, and the experiment finally worked. Two thin plastic sheets went through rollers, then got pressed together before the air could escape. Instead of a flat film, the air stayed trapped in neat little pockets. It looked odd, it felt even stranger, but it held its shape. That mattered because now they had something they could actually show to buyers. The material did not behave like anything used on walls at the time. It added texture without plaster, and it hinted at insulation without being thick, so they treated it like a design breakthrough, not a packing gimmick. They presented it as modern, clean, and technical, perfect for the kind of home people imagined in the future. The pitch sounded confident. The problem was the product sounded confident too. They pushed it as futuristic wallpaper for a new era of interiors, the kind that valued plastics and easy-to-wipe surfaces. The bubbles became the selling point, a built-in pattern, uniform and different, created by process instead of paint. Samples went out, meetings followed. They aimed at homeowners and designers who wanted something no one else had. It was a bold bet on taste, and on the idea that new automatically meant wanted. The pitch sounded modern, even daring, but once the bubbly sheet reached the real world of home decorating, momentum stalled. Shoppers did not know what to make of it, and many simply passed it by. It did not fit the familiar categories people bought for their walls. Designers, who could have turned it into a trend, did not champion it. The product existed, but the market did not respond. That silence mattered. Wallpaper depended on volume sales and steady demand, and this new material required manufacturing, storage, and constant promotion just to stay visible. Without orders, the economics turned harsh. Retailers had little reason to give it shelf space. The inventors faced a problem bigger than bruised pride. The original business plan started to unravel. A clever material, on its own, did not guarantee a place in people's homes. So the bubbly wallpaper became a solution looking for a problem. The very feature that made it different, the trapped air, now looked less like a style statement and more like a question. What was it actually good for? As interest in the decor idea faded, the inventors had to confront a hard possibility. If they could not find a new use fast, the material could become an expensive dead end. The pressure shifted from selling to surviving. With the wallpaper pitch falling apart, they needed the same material to answer a different problem. They looked for a place where trapped air actually mattered. Greenhouses offered that promise. Plants survived on stable warmth, and growers fought constant heat loss through thin coverings. So the bubbly sheets shifted roles. They were no longer decor. They were positioned as a practical layer meant to slow the cold down. The logic sounded simple, almost obvious. Air, when it stayed still, acted like insulation. Those sealed pockets created thousands of tiny barriers, each one meant to hold warmth in and keep frost out. Compared with standard glass or plain plastic film, the bubble layer sounded like an upgrade, lighter, flexible, and quick to install. If it worked, it did not just protect plants, it protected the business. They pushed the idea as a second life for the invention, not by changing what it was, but by changing what it was for. The same bubbles that once aimed to look futuristic now aimed to trap heat. The hope rested on performance, not style. If the material could create a warmer greenhouse with less fuel, growers would pay attention fast. This time, the market had a clear need. The question stayed brutal. Did the bubbles deliver enough? The greenhouse pitch sounded simple. Tiny pockets of air should have held warmth close to the plants. The sheets went up and the test began, but the results stayed stubborn. In real use, heat still escaped. Moisture built up in ways growers did not like, and the material did not behave like a serious building layer. It looked clever, but it failed to deliver the clear advantage they needed. Growers compared it to what they already trusted, and the comparison hurt. Standard coverings stayed cheaper, easier to handle, and more predictable season after season. The bubble sheet added complexity without solving the biggest problems. It also raised practical questions: how long it lasted, how it held up under daily wear, and whether it justified switching. The promised leap forward never arrived, and orders did not follow. That second setback forced a hard conclusion. The inventors had built their hopes on one idea: trapped air. On paper, it sounded like insulation. In the market, it sounded like a feature without a reason to buy. Warmth alone did not make it a product people adopted. If this material was going to survive, it needed a job where those bubbles did more than hold heat. After 2 failed uses, the inventors faced an uncomfortable truth. The material did not sell itself, but it did something else reliably every time it was handled. When pressure hit it, the bubbles did not just look interesting. They gave. They absorbed. That small physical reaction changed the question completely. It stopped being about what the sheet looked like or how warm it kept a space. They began thinking less like designers and more like problem solvers, because in the real world, products got damaged long before they reached a customer. Shipping was brutal, boxes dropped, trucks vibrated, corners crushed, and companies paid for it in returns, replacements, and lost trust. The bubble sheet suddenly seemed built for that exact violence. It did not need to be pretty. It needed to take a hit and keep going. That shift mattered because it aimed the invention at a constant, expensive pain point. A cracked item was not an aesthetic failure, it was money gone. And here was a material that wrapped around an object, held it in place, and spread out impact through thousands of tiny air pockets. The earlier pitches tried to convince people to want it. Now the goal became simpler: use it to stop things breaking. They stopped trying to sell the bubble sheet as something people looked at and started selling it as something people relied on. That meant entering the packaging world, where promises mattered less than results. They brought the material to shippers, manufacturers, and supply buyers who handled damage complaints every day. The pitch stayed simple. Air pockets acted like tiny shock absorbers. If it worked, the numbers would show it fast. Early adopters put it to the only test that counted: real shipments. They wrapped fragile items, boxed them up, and sent them through the same rough chain of loading docks, trucks, and sorting points that usually cracked corners and shattered glass. Then they checked what arrived. Some packages still took hits, but the breakage rate dropped. Fewer returns came back. Fewer angry calls followed. The material stopped being a curiosity and started behaving like a tool. Once the results spread, the value became easy to price. A thin sheet of bubbles cost less than replacing damaged goods, refunding customers, and reshipping orders. Packaging managers noticed that it also saved time because it wrapped quickly and conformed to odd shapes without special inserts. That practical advantage turned a trial into a habit. The bubble sheet earned its place by doing one thing consistently. It reduced what broke in transit. Once the first tests proved the bubble sheet reduced breakage, the next question was scale. One careful shipment did not matter much. Thousands did. Companies that moved expensive, easily damaged goods started paying attention because damage was not just a nuisance, it was refunds, replacements, and lost trust. The material offered something simple and repeatable, a lightweight cushion that wrapped tight, stayed put, and absorbed shocks along the way. As orders grew, the wrap had to perform like an industrial product, not a clever experiment. Packaging teams needed consistent bubble size, predictable thickness, and rolls that fed smoothly through fast packing lines. Warehouses needed it to store easily and use quickly. And managers needed the math to work. Less breakage had to outweigh the cost of adding a new material. The numbers started lining up, shipment after shipment. That shift changed everything. The bubble sheet stopped being a curiosity people tried once and became a standard companies built into their routines. It traveled with high-value items through distribution networks where drops, vibrations, and rough handling were normal. The more it got used, the more it proved its value, and the more other shippers copied it. A new packaging default had quietly taken hold because it solved a very expensive problem. Once big companies committed to bubble wrap, the demand did not level off. It spread. Shipping departments ordered it by the roll, then by the pallet, because it solved a basic problem fast. Fewer broken items meant fewer refunds, fewer angry calls, and fewer delays. That changed how businesses thought about packing. Cushioning stopped being an afterthought. It became part of the product. As more goods moved through mail order and delivery, bubble wrap followed the boxes into everyday life. People did not need to know who invented it or what it had once tried to be. They only needed to recognize the sound and the feel when a package arrived safely. The material became a small promise inside the carton. This should make it in one piece. That recognition turned into something bigger than packaging. Bubble wrap became a household name, shorthand for modern convenience, because it fit the new rhythm of buying at a distance. More shipping meant more wrapping, and more wrapping meant more visibility in homes, offices, and stores. The invention escaped its original idea completely. It ended up defining an era of delivery. In the end, the material stopped being a strange invention in search of a purpose. It settled into a role almost everyone understood instantly. It protected what people bought and what companies shipped, sitting between a fragile product and a rough journey. That simple job changed its reputation. It no longer looked like a failed design experiment. It looked like common sense, measured in fewer cracks, fewer returns, and fewer complaints. As more packages arrived wrapped in those air-filled pockets, the product stopped feeling specialized. It became a default. Warehouses kept rolls on hand, shipping counters expected it, and something else happened along the way. People started treating it like a toy. The same bubbles that softened impacts also made a sharp little pop, and that sound turned protection into a habit people repeated for fun. So, the legacy ended up running in two directions at once. On one side, bubble wrap meant safety in transit, a quick solution to a constant problem. On the other, it became a tiny form of stress relief, a throwaway moment of control in a hectic day. That outcome felt almost absurd when measured against where it started. as textured plastic wallpaper, pitched for walls, then rejected almost completely.